The Grizedale Estate in Everton, North Liverpool, was once one of the most deprived areas in Britain. 1 in 8 of the estate's population had convictions for drugs, firearms or violence. Many families with little or no income had turned to the drug trade as an alternative means of supporting themselves and their loved ones.
I think regarding getting involved in crime came with having a young family and no money. And then we met people who were quite big in Liverpool at the time, dealing drugs and stuff. And we became part in just minding drugs at first, at the young ages. And it just snowballed. Years and years later, I wouldn't say we became big, but we became where we were earning good money. And we became part of a big organised gang.
One of the most feared families in the area was the G's. They had a reputation for unspeakable violence.
I know Darren really well. He went with one of my friend's daughters as well. He used to go out with her as a young lad. And, you know, they were from a hard background, a hard area, 5 boys. They didn't have much money either, and we all got involved in the same thing. But we had other friends, William and John Moore. They were brothers. They were quite older than all of us. They were like 15 years older. And a feud started to occur in 2003 between John and Darren, which then, just because you're mates with someone, involves everyone to do with that gang.
When you say there's a feud, what sort of things are happening?
Just fights and cars getting smashed up and people smashing windscreens and threatenings and fights on the main roads and just stuff that escalated out of control to where we are, just a mess. It just ended up in a mess.
Those caught up in the mess included Tony Richardson, one-time fiancé of actress Jennifer Ellison. Their home was sprayed with bullets. The same week, a massive car bomb exploded outside Club 051. 6 days later, a hand grenade was thrown into a packed pub. On New Year's Day 2004, the killings began. 19-year-old Danny MacDonald, who was said to be responsible for the grenade attack, was murdered. 4 months later, innocent teenager Craig Barker was shot dead. Darren G, the intended target, survived.
There was a killing of an innocent young lad when the people wanted to kill Darren. Craig Barker was actually killed by mistake, which sadly is a young life lost. He was another good young lad. A hitman was hired. The hitman was meant to have killed Darren, but killed Craig. They did change seats that night due to Darren wanting to play on a console in the back of his vehicle. The phone call I got was that Darren had died, and weirdly enough, I started crying because at that time I knew David and Darren were having words, but it didn't affect how I felt for Darren because I've known Darren since young, and I did like him. It didn't surface for hours later that it was young Craig.
3 days after Craig Barker's murder, 18-year-old Michael Singleton was chased into his neighbour's home by a gunman. Cornered in the kitchen, Singleton was shot 4 times in the head and body and died shortly afterwards.
There was a young lad from Scotland Road whose family I know, Michael Singleton. He was killed regarding revenge shootings. Michael was shot in a kitchen of somebody's house, point blank in the head.
The Regans tried hard to remain impartial during the feud, as they were friends with both the Moores and the Gs. However, drug-fueled paranoia led to Darren G believing that Nikki's husband David had been involved in the attempt on his life, and tensions between the two rose.
Darren had problems with another gang from another area, had a paranoid image that everybody was trying to get him, which was totally wrong as well. But unfortunately, that's what Darren had in his head. David had received a number of threatening phone calls up until the day of his death, saying that he'd been the driver of the vehicle, they were going to do this, they were going to do that. And David being David, he just went to his business location, opened up that morning as usual. And I was in Manchester and Altrincham at the time, and the news was on and it was the car wash. There was 3 people in one car, and one gunman jumped out the vehicle, and in the car wash there's a little tiny wall, it must only be a foot high, and he's come out of his vehicle, Davey, and must have been trying to get away, and they've shot him in his back and his legs. Shot in the back 3 times. When David got killed and the police came, a few weeks later, they came up my path and they'd said, I'd already had a phone call saying they'd arrested Darren. And I said, please tell me it's not Darren. And he said, yeah, and I remember falling to my knees and saying no, because I didn't want it to be him. And it was him. And we've had to live with it ever since. Darren was convicted because his Galaxy apparently was on CCTV a bit further up the road, probably making sure the killing had been done. All a mess for nothing. 2 people killed innocently, Craig and Davey. Just a mess.
For drugs?
For drugs, yeah. And let's be honest, it was for drugs, for money. Not Craig, because Craig wasn't involved in nothing, but through mistaken being drivers of vehicles, but it still all boils down to drugs, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
Prior to her husband's murder, Nikki had ended their relationship after falling for her childhood friend William Moore. He comforted grieving Nikki whilst feigning shock at the senseless slaughter. He knew David Regan had been targeted in revenge for the botched attack on G, but he claimed it was all a terrible mistake because there wasn't any reason why the Gs should think Regan or his friends were involved.
I've known Willie 30 years now. I've lived on the same estate, the estate next to the Grizedale. Willie was lovely. Willie was just Willie. He was involved in whatever he was involved with years ago and then tried to sort himself out and not be involved and stuff. He was a nice man. He's my son's godfather. I was split from David when David was killed, but still married to him. And then started a relationship with William Moore for a few months, and then he was arrested for the murder of Craig. So that put me in a lot of shock, because it all then started to be connected. Willie was away for 9 years for drugs, and he'd met Darren on this sentence. Darren Moore's house. Became friends with Darren Moore's house, and then associated with Darren Moore's house on the outside. He was an ex-army, an ex-soldier, supposed to be the SAS, and he's meant to have hired him to do the killing of G. Waterhouse was from Luton, came up in his own vehicle, used his own telephones, brought his dog, and was meant to have been paid a large amount of money to be a hitman. The Mondeo was just circling and circling, and then just opened fire. A hitman who was William Moore's friend.
It's hard not to feel sympathy for Nikki Regan, but she chose to immerse herself in a world where apathy, sympathy and regret have no meaning.
When I first met Davey, we were just kids with nothing. He was a painter and decorator. I wouldn't change meeting him. I'd change the roads we went down. Big time.
It is an established fact that the Port of Liverpool has a long history of facilitating huge drug importations, and this has contributed to social decay and fractured communities within the city. The more traditional criminals such as Charlie Seeger were replaced by fearless, trigger-happy youths who use guns regardless of the devastation caused. Today, Liverpool's docks have been gentrified as the city attempts to move on from its grim reputation. Whether this is a sign of things to come remains to be seen. And do you honestly think anything will change?
No. No, I think that nothing's going to change. I think they're going 2 ways. The poverty areas, you're going 2 ways. You're dead or you're going to jail. Sadly, that's the way it is. Liverpool itself is a hard city to live. It's a very image-orientated city. And if you're from a family who's got nothing, and each parent wants better for the children, they want to be able to give the children the trainers they want, or the tracksuits, or the clothes. We all want to do that. But it's just, sometimes I think our kids in Liverpool want to belong to a gang just to belong. The authorities and that, yet they police it, but they don't see what they're living like. They don't see how they're coping day to day.
And what's the future for kids in these poverty estates?
I don't think there is one. I don't think there is one. But when you're living it and you're driving them 60, 70 grand cars, you don't give a shit. You don't give a shit. It's now that you give a shit. When you're looking at your kids growing up in the next generation, that you think shit.
But, you know, you're saying Liverpool's a shithole and poverty in it, but having drugs made, haven't you and others made it a shithole?
Yeah, we have, yeah. Yeah, I think we have, yeah.
drugs.
Yeah, we've run it into the ground with the drugs, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And the crime there is for drugs. It is for drugs. Anfield is a bad area. It's a bad area. Not all parts of Liverpool are shitholes at all. You've got the really lovely parts, believe it or not. But them areas I'm from, yeah, we did play a big part and we ruined it. And I know everyone to do with me, sitting in a cell or out of a cell, knows they played a part in that, because we did. And now, are we paying the price for that? Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are, and yet we have. And I think we're going to pay the price for the rest of our lives.